Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, which is entitled Thriving in the New Normal Workplace, a Guide for Now and Post MCO. So in the previous webinars that we've done, the world of work has consistently come up as a question for our other guest speakers. So we've invited Willis Towers Watson to come in. They've got two of the country's experts in this field, and they've done a survey of Malaysia's major companies. So they're going to be talking about the survey, and they're actually going to be talking about a hands-on practical toolkit of things to do. So first of all, let me introduce our two speakers to you. So our first one is Lim Chin Han. Lim Chin Han. He's the managing director and country leader for Willis Towers Watson in Malaysia, which is a leading global advisory, broking and solutions company with more than 39,000 employees in more than 120 countries. He's been in consulting for more than 25 years with both the private and government sectors in multiple situations, including change, events, mergers, transformation, strategic investments and divestments. His main areas of expertise include strategic and tactical HR interventions, leadership assessment, corporate governance, organization and board effectiveness, and M&As. Chin Han is a graduate of the London School of Economics and is also a member of the Institute of Actuaries. Dr Tan Juan Jim is the Executive Director and Country Leader of Talent and Rewards Business at Willis Towers Watson, Malaysia. He's more than 19 years experience in research, consulting and line management, with his focus being on helping clients meet their business goals through organization development, talent management, performance and rewards. He's led client work in a myriad of industries, including post-merger integration, performance management, and organization and workplace strategies, as well as talent management and strategic rewards. He's advised countless boards, cabinet ministers, and the C-suite. Jim holds a PhD in artificial intelligence and an MSc in e-commerce engineering from Queen Mary and from Westfield College, which is part of the University of London. Your moderator, you have two moderators today. The first one, Balraj Hanu, read law at Keble College, Oxford. After a stint as a solicitor in London and Hong Kong, he became an entrepreneur in the medical and wellness field. His latest project is a COVID-19 deep clean venture. He's a past president of our society and sits on our exco. I am the president of the society at the moment. I read PTE at Corpus Christi College, Oxford. I've worked in insurance, broking, adjusting and project management in London and in KL before moving into teaching, first at the British Council and now at College Tuanku Jaffa as the deputy head, or one of the deputy heads of the sixth form. So those are the people you're going to be hearing from today. Let me just outline how we're going to structure it. So it's going to be a combination of the survey that Willis Towers Watson have done and questions. And the questions are going to come from me and Balraj, and we hope that you following on YouTube will also put some questions too. Sharifa is in our studio as well, so she's monitoring your YouTube questions. She'll be taking your questions and sending them to me and Balraj. So please do write your questions in that YouTube feed. So we're going to split into three parts, and we would like the questions to be within each of the three distinct parts. So the first part is the survey that they've done, looking at the short-term and long-term consequences of the current crisis that we're going through. And again, questions on that should really be in that first third. The second set will be about what we can do about this and what are some of the strategies, obviously relating to jobs and how companies are going to be structured, how the job market is going to be affected. And the third part is going to be about the practical examples, the toolkit that they've got with some advice and examples for people, particularly focusing on working from home and how that workplace is going to change. All right, so those are three parts. Please send your questions in as and when, and Sheriff will send them over to us. So my first question really to Chin Han and to Jim is, how did you go about this survey and what's the survey? What are the conclusions?
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. And in addition to the wonders of technology, us being able to communicate remotely and everything, it's also really useful to see how your hair can look like 2 months without cutting it. I'm sorry, the pictures are completely misleading. So you'll have to deal with it because I have the last two months as well. Anyway, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the introduction, Emma. We WTW we've got employees worldwide, but in Malaysia we've got about 150 employees. Just a little bit of context so you know on what basis we are talking to you about these points. We mainly consult with large companies in Malaysia, and when we consult, we generally focus in the human capital space, the corporate governance space, and a little bit on the strategic implementation phase. We are not strategy consultants. We help organizations with strategies and make it real in terms of making sure that their organization structures and people and all that are aligned to what they're trying to achieve. So on that basis, most of the companies that work with us are large. So as this thing unfolded in the last 6 to 8 weeks, we thought it would be interesting to see what our clients are facing. There were studies outside on SMEs and different industries reporting what they were doing, and we wanted to do the same for our clients. And so we surveyed about 300 odd of our biggest clients, of our key clients. We got about responses from about 120 of them. And the results were earth-shattering. I mean, what we will share some of the stuff with you. But what was very, very interesting is that what SMEs are doing in the face of this crisis, they're addressing it head already, right? You've seen headcount reductions, pay cuts, pay freezes, all of those things implemented straight away. One of the things that we found from the survey, and I don't want to take away Jim's thunder, but most of the large companies that we surveyed have not done any of this yet. But when we asked, are you going to possibly do this in the next 12 to 18 months? I think the vast majority are saying it's a distinct possibility. So in a way, corporate Malaysia hasn't quite felt it yet. I mean, they felt it, but they haven't executed on it yet. But the key thing from the survey is that we are looking at, a lot of action going on in the next 12 to 18 months. So a couple of things on the survey itself, right? There were some assumptions that we made to this. One fundamental assumption is that we assume that this MCO, when it's lifted, is still going to be a part of our lives moving forward. What does that mean? We believe there will be intermittent MCOs over the next few years, maybe not to the extent that we have now. Maybe the CMCO could be implemented again. So we are not assuming that it's a binary thing where we go from lockdown into open it all up again and everything will be back to normal and people will be scrambling back to normal. It's not going to be, we didn't work on that assumption. We also are assuming, and which we actually confirmed, that employers were also using this time to test certain things, right? Test different models. Even in our company, as it went along, as in WTW, there was a survey that was sent out to all the leaders and all the offices around the world and said, moving forward, how comfortable how have you guys handled working from home, right? Is this going to be, we already do that, but there is a sense of maybe moving forward, what more can we do, or is this something that's going to be a new normal even for us? One CEO who's possibly on this webinar as well commented to me last week. He said, "I'm shocked at how effective these Zoom calls are or video conferencing calls are for my senior meetings. He said, moving forward, I'm probably going to do most of it using video conferencing." You know? So these are all things that organizations are going through at the moment and testing what the new normal is going to be. The other thing we also found is that no two companies are the same, right? So there are industries which are obviously struggling more than others, and the automotive sector is one of them. And the interesting thing is you see the general typical companies facing a lot of challenges, but Tesla's share price, in spite of their CEO basically saying that he himself thought it was overpriced, has bounced back and it's now at almost its peak, right, in terms of its value. And there are stats, I mean, then these numbers that everybody knows that they're larger than General Motors and Ford all put together or something like that. So Tesla, so even in industries which are challenging, there are winners and there are losers, right? At the moment. So one of the things that Jim will talk about moving forward is how organizations need to adapt to this whole thing. And even in industries that are challenging or industries which are supposed to be growth, are going to be what they need to do to survive, right? So the last thing I'm going to say before passing it on to Jim to take us through the 3 points. At the end of the day, we like to say that this is not really a financial crisis. This is not an economic crisis. This is a human capital crisis, right? Where it's unprecedented. The governments are working together with organizations, with corporates, with NGOs, with stakeholders, with the community in a way that is completely unprecedented. So in this human capital crisis, tough decisions are being made all the time. Governments are balancing between opening up lives, livelihood, that sort of thing, which people have talked about. But at the end of the day, it's a human capital crisis, right? And human capital crisis, work is one part of the big equation that keeps the economy going, keeps family units going, keeps the community going, right? So, and this is something that we feel companies need to address because moving forward, they have a huge responsibilities. I mean, with 116 companies that in our survey, between them, they employ hundreds of thousands of employees, right? So if they make the wrong move, they fail, it's going to affect hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people's livelihoods and so forth. So we're looking at it from that perspective. On that note, I will pass it on to Dr. Jim to take us through the deck, and obviously, we'll take your questions as they come along.
Okay.
All right, thank you, Chin Han, and thank you, Emma, for the introduction. I'll jump right into some of the slides. Essentially, as you heard from Chin Han, I think one of the key things that we did a survey with Corporate Malaysia, and again, this doesn't represent everyone in Malaysia's economic context, but this takes a more focused view on the ones that are the larger corporations, and I'm sure the smaller corporations would probably have a different view of some of these things. But generally, I think what the message that we're seeing here is that we recently asked this question about the impact of COVID on the business, and in over different time frames, you'll find that most of them are coming around to say that there is largely a large to moderate impact to their businesses, and this is no surprise and very nothing that is earth-shattering here. But what is interesting from this slide is that we picked up a portion of it saying that they actually do not know what's going to happen in the next 24 months, right? So this thing gives us the question around that, whether are these people really just kind of like waiting and seeing in that sort of mode, or are they really prepared, or are they not prepared for what's coming up ahead of them? But what is interesting from this question is that it went away to say that actually about 90% of them were actually said that they were prepared in this process of getting into the MCO, right? And this whole COVID crisis in terms of enabling them to operate during this period. So when we looked at this, it gives us a bit of a mixed signals, because really when we had references of work that's being done with the World Economic Forum, I think late last year, there was actually one question about whether our companies in the G20 as well as OECD countries are at all prepared in terms of their risk registers for a pandemic. The answer is that less than 10% of them were actually prepared. And even far lesser than that were actually prepared from a working from home perspective, right? So very contrasting views that we're getting from corporate Malaysia here. And maybe the lens here is that they are only focusing from an MCO perspective, right? Which then leads us to the next point here, which we found a bit more interesting as we dig deeper. And we find that, I suppose this is one hypothesis that we have, is that a lot of the companies are probably looking at more immediate operating measures. And I think from this slide, you can see that a lot of them have started to do things that are more practical, that are more immediate in terms of work arrangements, in terms of sanitization, in terms of educating employees on the precautionary measures. But what I would like to highlight here is two things. One is that there's this 38% of them who says that they were only ready for things that brings about slightly more longer term aspects of it, such as your employee emotional, mental health, safety, as well as financial well-being, right? So this then gives us the indication that whilst they were doing the things that are more immediate in terms of reacting to the situation, but there were these things that were left there unanswered. And the other third thing that I picked up from here is that, yes, a lot of companies went down that freezing of hiring, or even what we call sometimes selective hiring, but a very small percentage of them actually went down unpaid leave or even any layoffs, right? Which if we if we fast forward it to today, and in fact this survey is not too old, it's probably less than a month old, maybe 2 to 3 weeks ago. But if you fast forward today, what you find is that a lot of companies have actually started to go through furloughs and unpaid leaves, as well as layoffs and so on and so forth, right? So the distinction from what we see about 2 to 3 weeks ago to what we see now in the press and in what we hear from the market is very, very different, right? So we also picked up things like the Malaysian unemployment rate has gone up to about 600 over 1,000 people who are unemployed. We see that in the US, there is about 20 million unemployment in April alone, and bringing it up to about 14.7% across the US workforce. So those are very, very high numbers that we're seeing. And again,
Jim, can I pick you up on a few things, because you've covered so much ground. I just need to a little bit capture back what you said earlier. If I can just invite you back to the earlier slides. The first thing to note, I think, is you sent out 300 requests and only 120 replied, right? So more than 50 didn't reply. So you were saying there's a bit of mismatch between what the media is saying and what your results surveys are. This is partially because it's a smaller sample size, right? There's a bias for people who did reply. Maybe they are doing a bit better than the rest. Is that a fair comment?
Yes, that could be a fair comment.
Yeah, so there is a bit of bias in the survey, in that those who are doing well, they would reply, and they are saying things are not so bad. Those who are not doing so well, they just don't bother replying. So we didn't capture that. Okay, so that's possible. But I also want to pick you up.
Balraj, having said that, 120 especially in our universe is fairly representative, and I wouldn't say that the responses were very positive within them anyway, right? While they say they were prepared or whatever, I think a lot of them are saying that they're worried about it. So I wouldn't imagine there is a skew towards the positive with this sample size. Yeah.
Understand. Can I just pick up on what was the 1% companies who are actually doing well with COVID? You know, your blue color in the first slide, I think it was. Can you share a bit on that? Because always good to hear some good news. Yeah, that 1% in the first 6 months.
Okay, so those companies that fall into the category typically are coming from those that are more essential services, and those include things like your consumer staples. And not all consumer businesses are doing well. Mostly the discretionary ones are not so well, but the ones that fall into the staple category are doing better. Chin Han, do you have any other industries that you want to add from some of your cases that you saw?
Yeah, so certain biotech companies. I mean, within this sample, in this particular case, there were more logistics companies, certain ones who saw an uptick, and then as Jim said, the consumer staples and so forth. But as I said from the start, this was interesting because when you look at it, there are winners and losers in all industries, right? And so even like one interesting thing for me was that in the biotech space, and just talking about winning and losing, because there's such huge emphasis on trying to find a vaccine. I don't know whether you guys know this, but in the US, they pushed aside all other lab tests, which they're deprioritizing it so that the COVID vaccine is prioritized, right? But on that basis, things like there have been reports that things to address Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, for example, all have been pushed aside, And so these are things which are also very, very important. So we could be seeing a lag in terms of some of the progress with other sort of ailments because of this situation as well. So it's not just companies losing out and so forth. It's like issues which are being prioritized and deprioritized. So that's I mean, it's not completely linked to this 1% thing, but this is where the winners and losers thing is really apparent.
Thank you.
Can I ask a quick question? So what I thought was interesting was that they were relatively optimistic at the sort of 6-month, 12-month stage, and then pessimistic or very uncertain, high levels of uncertainty at 58% at the 2-year stage. Do you think that's because they have a certain lack of confidence in the way that the central bank and the government is responding to this crisis, and that as an emergency, they're able to control what they're doing. They feel quite confident about what they can do. But going forward, they're a bit worried about the way the infrastructure landscape is going to look.
There is a possibility on that. Maybe I just add one point, and Chin Han, if you have any other points. But we did have one question that were asking whether some of the government stimulus and incentives, how are they perceiving it? And there was actually a large portion of them that felt that most of the incentives do not quite apply or are quite useful for these companies, right? So again, there could be that uncertainty linked to this, but it is not a direct correlation.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just going to say we probably can't extrapolate these answers into something as specific as as that, but definitely I think the political situation and all that doesn't help in terms of a lot of these companies' responses as well. So it's important to remember that this is not like supposed to represent the whole of Malaysia, right? These SMEs have a completely different ecosystem. These are from GLCs, multinationals primarily, which seem to have lagged a little bit before in terms of their responses, but they are worried about it moving forward. I don't know whether it's directly because of the government stimulus or what central bank is going to do or whatever, so specifically.
Okay, thank you. And can I just pick up another thing? I think you were saying that more than 50% felt that they were ready for this, but actually, if you look at this graph, they are still negatively impacted, right? So it's like almost 85% think that they are prepared or very prepared, mostly prepared or very prepared, 70 plus 14. So 84% think they were very prepared, but then you look at the earlier numbers, they're quite badly. The numbers seem a bit different, right? Any thoughts on this, guys?
Yeah. So my thinking is that why some of them probably answer this is more towards more immediate actions that they're taking, which is about getting people to work from home immediately, and then looking at putting in place certain working arrangement measures in the office. But I suppose the important thing here is that those, if you see the next slide on what we found as well, a lot of this probably fall more towards the shorter term things, the more immediate term things, but the more medium term effects of it have not been kind of like addressed. So, which is what they are going to be feeling at this stage when profit numbers are not met and quarterly numbers are not met, and those pressures are going to start coming in.
Yeah, I'm going to add that, Balraj, this is something that, Jim will touch on later on, because really we have a view on what prepared for the intermittent MCO is going to be like, right? And it's all definition, right? If you don't know what you don't know, you think you're prepared. So I think this that Jim is going to go through later on, I think it's going to be very useful for people to realize, hey, we've done some of the short-term stuff, but how we're going to continue to engage our employees in a virtual environment, be taking care of their mental health, for example. How are these things being covered? So all of this stuff, come under the definition of prepared, not prepared. We have a longer list than most people. Let's put it that way. So that's Jim will get to that at a later point.
Fantastic. Can I just take a question from the floor, please? I think there is some question about, would they be changing working arrangements? For example, would they be thinking of flexible arrangements, zero contracts? Would you be looking out for new skills? What are your thoughts on this? Is this something that was covered?
Yes, actually, in the next section, I'll be covering a little bit more about that. So in terms of what the point of view and how does that impact skills and demand and so on and so forth.
Okay. Yep. Okay. We'll get to it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Oh.
So if I move into the second section here, I think one of the key things that we see is that there's going to be 3 distinct stages, right? And out of these 3 distinct stages, you're going to go through the process of managing through the crisis, restoring stability, and also operating post-crisis. But I think what we want to basically set up here is that how organizations are going to start relooking at themselves. So what was our point of view around that? So we came up with basically 4 key imperatives here because one, I think organization coming out of this situation is going to feel a few things, right? It's not about just looking at delivering higher value like before, but it is a little bit about even going back to say that, hey, can we even survive 2020? And that itself, being able to survive 2020 is an achievement, right? So when we go through that, we actually do see quite a lot of companies going through this process of redefining their core, which what they really need to be doing, right? And if you ask me for any sort of like local examples, I mean, I can start to see that companies are adapting to the changes, and those that are a bit ahead of the curve in terms of the innovation, they are really trying to look at tapping on partnerships and how they can work with other firms to create what we sometimes plug and play and orchestrating new services out of it. So one example here is that, I'm not sure if you have used this service before. It is actually a point of sale service that many F&B outlets are using. It's called Store Hub. So they deal with a lot of POS systems. But what is interesting with Store Hub is that they have started to go into the food delivery, food ordering, takeaway thing, right? So in that process, they have started to look at building up this thing called BPIT, right? So F&B outlets who used to be in a traditional way, today, which they are the most largely affected, have now this access into basically being able to get online, being able to publish their services and their menus online, and allowing that ordering to go through online, right? And to further add to that, how these companies are actually redefining themselves is that they started to even work with partners such as GoCar, right? So how they work with GoCar to say that for those people who are now either under the MCO or either has lost their jobs or either on unpaid leave and so on and so forth, actually there's an opportunity for you to go and rent a car for 30 ringgit a day and go and do food delivery. So again, solving that demand, which there is a sharper increase when it comes to food delivery. I mean, I'm sure some of you who have tried food delivery during the MCO period, it's either that you do not have a rider, or you don't have a driver that's able to send food. So these are some of the examples that companies have started to take in terms of redefining their core to kind of like rapidly recover revenue. But what I think is very key here is that it's really around the second point that I want to make here, right? Is that organizations have to go down this path of making work portable, right? And this work portability thing, actually, if you look at it, it is about making ourselves more plug and play, not so traditionally in a hierarchy manner. And this hierarchy manner is what is creating organizations to be more complex and less open to sort of changes and agility, right? So there is actually an interesting example that I have in the next couple of slides that I want to kind of like walk you guys through an example so you can appreciate what we mean by this making work portable, right? So we actually at WTW, we have this process of what we call deconstructing, reinvent, and reconstructing jobs into what we call reinvented work, right? So, and this is not just for the sake of it in terms of reinventing jobs, but the main principle that we share about reinventing jobs is that it must create incremental or exponential value. So the process of doing that is not about, let's say, correcting errors, making it less error-free, right? Those are just typical automation that you do. But what you want to create is that it must create that level of improved performance. So in that process, we actually did work for Cross, but I think this is a very simple example that I wanted to share with you, that there are 3 main components that were built out of this scenario where we talk about bank tellers in a typical bank, right? Where most of the time, the bank teller's role is 70% technical and 30% of it is customer service, right? So what I mean by 70% technical, most of the majority of their tasks and activities revolves around things that includes processing of checks, doing your transfers, and then exchange of currency, etc., etc. And then 30% is dealing with the customer itself. But what is important here is that when you start looking at reinventing of jobs, you want to not only look at automating certain parts that are more repetitive in nature, right? And also putting aside what requires still maintaining human intervention. But what is interesting is the one on the lower right, which is the one in purple, that says that how do you actually take that jump or that shift to say that today we are a bank that is just doing as a clearing house, right? Or a transaction clearing house. But how do we become a bank that drives customer experience, drive added value from a customer management perspective? So the augmentation of using data, as well as how the bank teller becomes more of a relationship manager with his customers, will now change, right? So I'm able to identify better ways of sweating your assets, because I do know what is your spending patterns. I do know what kind of cash reserves you have, and then what station of life you're in, right? And so on and so forth, right? Yeah. So those were some of the key things that we felt that was important. And I'll just kind of pause here for a bit before I go into the next part of this.
Yeah, Jim, I have a question. So a lot of the changes you're talking about there, particularly when you talk about sort of broadening your employment repertoire and resetting the culture and experience and things, those things were happening already. They were already in motion. And it may be that this crisis has somewhat accelerated that. But this is not really the sort of seismic shift in workplace mentality that we're thinking of. I think we've all just, in my own sector, education, we were talking to Elizabeth Lee from Somewhere about this. I mean, these are all things we were sort of testing the waters with, but now we're just doing them faster than what we would have done. So I'm just wondering whether these are such big changes. And then my second question really is, when you, in your slide about sort of reinventing the jobs process, is that actually kind of like downsizing, basically, a lot of things? And are we going to end up with a greater sort of divide between the skilled and the unskilled?
So I was just going to say that with this reinventing jobs and everything, we've been talking to clients about this for the last 10 years, and it's as you've pointed out, it's not new. People should have been doing all of these things anyway, but because of the situation, people have had to do it and are looking at this as a way of life. So it's like a style thing, right? At some point when you give up meat or whatever, it's always a plan, but until you actually do it, it becomes a seismic event when you actually do it yourself, right? Not when you decide that you possibly need to do it, because everybody knows it, but once you actually do it, it becomes a completely different experience. So we've also noticed that the smaller companies have adopted this already, right? So if they have to cut certain outlets, or they got to let people go, they just let people go straight away. They explore different tools, different platforms to do their work. They've just been doing it, right, over the last 2 months. But large companies can do this as well. One of the companies that Jim is working with is a heavy industry company, right? They sell huge pieces of equipment, and they're a huge conglomerate in Malaysia. And because of this, they're completely relooking at how they want to manage their service delivery model, in terms of how much people they want to use, how much technology they want to use instead, how many partners they want to have, how many freelancers, gig economy stuff, people on contract. So, these are all things that people want to embrace now. And again, on the assumption that this intermittent MCO thing is going to be part of our new normal, this has to be the only way to go, right? Carrying headcount is not going to be sustainable. So, yeah.
Do you think the Malaysian labour market is flexible enough to respond to that? I mean, on the one side, you have America, where you've got 33 million have filed for unemployment. I mean, it's just they're gone, right? Those jobs are gone. And the UK, you've got the government furlough scheme, where they're paying 80% of the salaries, a quarter of the salaried staff in the UK, which is huge. The government's paying that to keep the unemployment down. Do you think in Malaysia, not having that labour market flexibility that somewhere like the States has, is that this transition will be slower, less painful but less effective? How is the structure of our labour market going to affect that shift?
I think, and this is just my personal view, right? Because of the labor market and how hard it is to fire people, frankly, organizations are using this as a burning platform, taking the opportunity now, and all the more because it's so hard to manipulate the workforce, so to speak. Organizations will need to be very mindful about whether they want to carry permanent headcount moving forward. So, necessity being the mother of invention, I think this is the situation that we're in. The labor market being the way it is going to force organizations to adopt these flexible arrangements more than other countries, I would say.
Yeah. Which goes back to the question that we had from Sharifah. Do you think that we will have more 0-hour contracts coming in?
It's a matter of time, yes. The simple answer is yes. Yeah. And flexible arrangements, we are also not talking about, sorry, Jim, just 1 second here. So it's not just work from home, it's work from anywhere. So Jim will mention something along these lines.
Yeah. I mean, I'd like to echo that as well, because actually, if we talk about whether are we ready or not, I think the question is that there is no choice. That if you look at the large corporations, and although they feel that they can survive or weather this through a little bit better, but the reality is that a lot of smaller, medium sized organizations are in fact impacted by this COVID situation a lot more badly, and for them it is a matter of survival, right? So some of them who are larger, they run large operations of a few hundred workers. They have operating costs of anywhere from 2 to 3 million a month, and without any orders coming in, we are looking at 25 to 30 million going down for the whole year, right? So it's either they die or they reinvent. So a lot of these organizations, I think, will force things going through to say that I do not want to rely on having so many workers. I do not want to be caught out in the next downturn to say that I am now without opportunities or without being able to survive. I have to shut down. So this situation here is actually, I think, going to be a big reset for a lot of organizations when they start thinking about redefining their core. And when we mean by redefining their core is more of how they operate rather than the core business itself.
So Emma, you see, the thing is, this is the corporate angle, right? What Jim has mentioned, but there's a social angle to it as well, and there's an educational angle to this, right? So people, my generation or a generation before that, the thought has mainly been, study, get a job, change jobs a few times, and then see what happens, see where we end up, right? 10 years ago, it was not about changing jobs and changing companies within the same job. It's been changing careers, right? There are lots of people who want to start up something, then go back and work for somebody, and so forth. So if organizations, especially the big organizations, are going to carry less headcount, you're going to have fewer and fewer people working for one company at any one time, and committed to one organization. So I think there's an impact on education. There's an impact on how people are going to live. Perhaps more short term, in the West, I think people have a shorter, different parts of the world have different, cultural habits when it comes to saving, about enjoying your life now or later, and I think there's going to be a bit more short-termism involved because, you're not committed to one single entity for a long period. So there are interesting sociological things as a result of this as well, in my view.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question? So we agree that it's been going on for a while how can we generate more value? How can we use more automation? How can we use more IT data? That's the going trend. What advice would you give to the workers? What would you say they should do to respond to the fact that we know the companies are going to be looking to integrate more and more tech? The losers were going to be the workers, right? They're going to lose out to AI and they're going to lose out to some automation. What advice could you give to them, perhaps?
I'll start. Actually, there's no one answer. If you're a genius in a particular area, and which is very important to society moving forward, then my advice is make sure that you're paid what you're worth. Okay, so that is, you are a wanted person. It's important to get the right price, so to speak, for your skills and knowledge. If you're kind of middling and you do a job which is easily replaceable by automation or AI, then you should definitely be worried, and you should even start to consider to rent a car and so forth, as Jim mentioned, and start to think about things that you can actually contribute through your physical exertion. I would say non-performers should be very, very worried. They'll lose their job straight away. So in a nutshell, it depends on which category you fall under, right? There's always going to be an opportunity for people who adapt, who know how to flex to the situation, and this continuous learning thing that everybody talks about is going to be even more important now. So I would say the main thing is to be flexible. Keep an eye out on how you can add value to your company. I mean, all organizations will have people that who are worth more than what they bring to the table in terms of what they do for you, and those guys or girls are going to be they're going to be safe. All organizations need people who are going to pull together, and individuals who are too specific about what I do and what I don't do, this is my job, not my job kind of thing, I think those guys are going to be the ones who are going to suffer. So it really depends, so there are huge opportunities for people who have skills or who don't have the skills but are willing to go and acquire them, so things change all the time. It's a matter of being able to find your niche, but you have to be flexible. Employees need to be flexible.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Anything else, Jim?
Yeah, I mean, the other thing as well, I mean, the advice for individuals, I mean, on a more general front, is that a lot of people find it, of course, difficult to relearn new things, right? So the importance of the learning quotient here is key, and resilience. So advice for individuals is really about your learning agility, to be able to embrace new things, to look at new things. But the other thing as well is that a lot of work is going to be transposed into doing something well, as in like more skill-based. So if you focus in terms of driving certain skills, certain areas that you're very good at, focus on building that instead of trying to do everything, right? And I think like what Chin Han said, if things that can be taken away by machines and automation, likely it could be and will be. But there is also the element of cost justification, right? Because companies will still look for alternatives to say that if machines and all the automation actually costs more than if I were to then outsource some of these things to people who can do it more effectively, then why not, right? So there will still be opportunities in different aspects of it, depending on price economic ratios, right? So different horses for different courses, but my takeaway from this is learning agility and focusing on skills development.
And actually, guys, this is not the first time it's happening, right? When the steam engine was invented, people said, "Oh, that's the end of work as we know it." And then when computers were invented, everybody said they were going to be out of a job, right? So this is a constant cycle. There's always going to be jobs because people still need to guide and invent new things, right? And I think Jim is going to touch on this later on. Innovation will come from humans with the help of technology, So this is not the first time people have been worried about having jobs, right? It's it's 130-year-old problem. Every 20, 30 years with a new invention, that's the end of work as we know it. So.
Yeah. Sorry, Balraj, just to add to that point, one wise man once told me that rock and roll will change the world.
Yes.
Yeah.
Perfect.
So actually, the deck that you sent us, the sort of full presentation, was actually a lot more positive about this is an opportunity for some companies to, show true leadership and to sort of really engage with their communities and their workers, and to actually sort of stand out as good models and to build relationship with employees. And already there are some private companies that are doing great things like deferring payments and not cutting salaries and giving and guaranteeing certain things to reassure employees. And I'm just wondering whether there is an opportunity for leadership to be shown in companies as we move towards more flexible working and home working. And what should those great companies and organizations be doing to help their employees make this transition of working from home, something sort of practical for them?
Yeah, Jim, can you get to the slide? I think it's 14. Where next? The one before. Yeah, this one is really good to go through because really this is what it is when you work in the new normal. Right? So, Jim.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll touch a little bit on this section here. So basically, if you recall from the earlier slide, that 38% of companies have actually focused on areas around well-being, and if you look at some of these challenges that I have fleshed out here, it is a very real impact to organizations. So some of which, just to quickly quote, one of the things is that we will experience is that there's this whole out of sight, out of mind situation, right? So employers and even business leaders will be thinking, my people, are they really working or are they actually having taking time off at home, right? So these are some of the real challenges that people are facing. And truly, when we talk about people working from home, maybe for some of us it is true, but many people have other duties at home as well, such as studying from home, cooking from home, teaching from home, even childcare at home, right? So that they had to actually look into. And out of all these things that they're doing, there are also situations whereby they're going to be work from home accidents. So questions like whether SOCSO covers this, and then whether does insurance and all this takes care of all those sort of things. And the other challenge that we've seen a lot with organizations, which is all these very practical challenges, is that some of them don't even have a conducive place where they have a proper desk, air conditioning, Wi-Fi, the right ergonomics, and we're likely going to be seeing more work-related hazards, occupational hazards that's going to come out of it. So they're possibly going to be higher claims in terms of work-related injury, right? And more importantly here is that clarity, right, around policies and SOPs. How do we then sometimes need to take that principle of how we deviate from what needs to be done? So I think what WTW looks at is that there is this whole intersection, right, that is important to balance between the organization or the company's interest as well as the employee's well-being in terms of safety, health, financial, and so on and so forth. So there are actually three things that we wanted to kind of talk about, and I think this is also to address some of the questions that you raised, Emma, that these three things really look at, one, of course, the leadership and also the over-communication, right? So how are we in this sort of work from home, work from anywhere situation, looking at enabling and also empowering leaders and managers to basically put in place or restore the level of stability, right? And again, SOPs are very critical here to allow us to then put in place the clarity that we need. But more importantly here, I think as leaders, it is actually an opportunity, a defining moment for leadership to show what is that value proposition that they push for the employees, meaning to say that what's the care and value that they provide, right? So if you look just in the neighboring countries, when the COVID situation became significantly higher, which is Singapore, a lot of this stemmed from the dormitories, right? And I think there was this question on kind of like that humanity question to say that, were these people going to be taken care of, or because whether are they treated as local Singaporeans or are they actually foreigners working in Singapore, right? So, but it was very interesting that as a leader, the Prime Minister came out to say, no, we are going to be taking care of everybody and no stones will be left unturned, right? And so there were some very heartfelt messages that were sent out to show that this is the kind of defining moment that leaders will have to go through. And the second thing here is about performance and rewards. And I think this is a very practical thing that people all start to look at. So as we see, there are a lot of benefits that organizations provide to their employees. And honestly, if you look through, sieve through each of them, you'll find that many of these benefits can actually be repurposed and be shifted towards things that are more work related, so that you enable the working from home, you enable the opportunity for them to get maybe a home office, the laptop, the Wi-Fi, the access, and so on and so forth, that they can then start to use some of these benefits in the right purpose. But the other thing as well is that how do we then look at protecting the total rewards element? So some organizations have started to shift what they have budgeted for in terms of certain variable components towards things that they can cover in terms of the fix. Although companies have taken a more aggressive stance in terms of saying that they have gone down the path of pay cuts, but there are also companies who start by saying that how do we optimize, meaning to say that they cut down discretionary spending to the bone, right? And then they put that as the first priority. Then they look at how they can operate using cross resources, where there are parts where you have a higher demand and you have a lower demand. How do I balance out certain supply and demand issues before they start looking at affecting jobs and pay? So these are some of the practical examples that companies have taken. But also interestingly, from the rewards perspective, especially we talk about incentivization and retention of high performers, companies has also started to look at using stock-based programs versus using cash, because they like to preserve the cash flow and so on and so forth, right? So these are some of the things that companies started to look in terms of rewards. And also, more importantly, then looking at not just the physical well-being of employees, but also taking care of the emotional, mental, and financial aspects of it, right? So some of this is what we have been seeing with regards to how organizations have started to do in Malaysia.
Yeah. Do you think that there's going to be sufficient sort of legislation and statutory protection for employees as we move to this new workplace? I mean, if you just the companies in the news, it seems to be the publicly listed companies who have been ruthless in this transition to this new kind of work arrangement. And it's the private ones where we're getting the stories of them being flexible with their employees and treating them well. Do you think we need more statutory protection to reflect this change in the working environment?
Definitely, but I wouldn't hold my breath about this happening, but definitely there need to be changes in terms of protection for employees and also for employers, right? So I think all that needs to be addressed. I'm not sure it's going to happen straight away, but I think the surprising thing about this is when, as Jim brought this up, right, when you communicate the issues and you communicate the situation well to employees, we've had many organizations talk to us, especially the smaller ones, right, who have implemented pay cuts and everything. The employees themselves say, thank you very much. We know this is the situation. Thank you for letting us know in advance. And we are happy to do, I mean, we're of course sad that you're doing this to us, but we understand, and let's get on with life, and see how it goes on. So I think there's a government side to it, there's a statutory side to it which protects it, but with good management, good leadership, I think that will help a long way, because I think waiting for the statutory side to come in to take care of some of this stuff is going to be, it's going to be
challenging in the current political climate.
That's right. So I think it's about understanding. Communication is very important. And if you notice, I mean, I don't know whether you guys have tracked this, but when some of the CEOs in America have declared that they're not going to take their salaries and making a big show out of it, there's a backlash, right? Because the people who know say that, okay, you're giving up your $1.6 million salary, but that is 2% of your $100 million package, which includes stock options and so forth. So, and actually that came out really badly, because it looked like people were just paying lip service to it. I'll do this and everything, and not saying, oh, I'm giving up my $100 million of stock options or whatever, right? So I think this authenticity of leadership is very, very important, and employees will understand if you walk the talk, Yeah.
Yep. And again, I think to add to that, I think the main principle here is that all these elements that we talked about has to be done on a principle of good faith, right? Because if we take furloughs and we take unpaid leaves and we take pay cuts of our employees, I mean, these are the people who are needing the cash the most. I mean, 20%, 30% is actually a large portion to what their spending ability is, right? But if you look at these savings that they get, and in the end of the year, we get directors and senior management receiving bonuses still, that is not going to go down very well, right? So all these things that companies are doing, and as what Chin Han said, that although CEOs in large corporations take a 50% haircut of their base salary, that is nothing in terms of their total rewards.
Great. Yeah. Jim, I just want to focus a bit if I can. So what you're saying, correct me if I'm wrong, is we had such a good system when people are working in the office. We give them nice tables, chairs, we look after them. But now they're working from home, and that entire infrastructure is missing, right? The hard infrastructure, the soft infrastructure, all of that is missing. And so I think some of your suggestions here is how we can adapt to these changes of working from home. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
That's absolutely right. So like Google with their free food, free, access to this sort of thing, bean bags and all that, it's out the window, I mean, yeah. So great pickup, Balraj, because that's exactly the point that we're making.
Great. So one of the questions we have is from Shabil Yaya, and is saying that how can I make my employers trust me? I'm working productively from home. It's a very good reversal of the discussion in a way.
Okay, so
you set a deadline, you meet it. Beyond that, but that's my take, Jim.
Yeah. So actually, this is a very valid question, and that's where in our microsite at WTW, we actually have a bit more information on this whole working from home and how do you maintain performance and productivity. So one of the things is that we set up basically a cadence whereby the employee and or the bosses or the employer have a more regular check-in, and of course that check-in is on setting up that cadence on the basis of what works for that job scope, right? And the more you communicate, the more that you set up this sort of open channels with the employee will then create that greater trust, right? And I think the other thing as well is that, I mean, when we work in an office environment, it's very easy for me to like step over to your desk and then talk to you or tap on your shoulder and say, hey, can I have a quick word? And so forth, or come to my office, etc. But when you're working from home, do I need to make an appointment? Do I need to make the look at your calendar and so on and so forth? So these are the things that there are companies who have started to look at how we can make that kind of open calendar more accessible, whereby you do not need to actually do all those sort of things by having technology enabling them to ping each other more freely and openly, despite working remotely. So this thing that of building trust has to be a two-way thing and has to be on the basis of building certain cadence, certain clarity on SOPs that we mentioned very, very broadly here, but we actually have more details in our microsite that if some of you are interested.
Yeah, just to add on this, right? This is exactly what it is, So working from home needs its own etiquette, right? So even between Jim and his team and our team of consultants, it's easy to walk over and so forth. But when you're working from home, generally, if there's an email that you have to assume that it's like somebody walking over, so you got to respond fairly quickly, right? If somebody calls you, that's a different level of response required. You need to pick up the phone or at least call back within a few minutes or whatever. So there are protocols that need to be set up, because you working from home doesn't mean you're at home and you happen to be working, right? You are actually working and you happen to be at home. I mean, it's a completely different, it's a subtle difference, but we have to look at it from that perspective as well. So these are some of the small things when Jim talks about policy changes, protocols, SOPs, and so forth. I mean, even W2W, when we've been working from anywhere for years, right? We've had to set up some of these protocols as well, because it's frustrating sometimes when you're trying to sort something out and nobody picks up your phone call or whatever, right? So we've had to set up some of these things ourselves as well. And once it becomes habit, then, you know, it becomes the new normal as well. And that's how you create that trust between employer and employee as well, and between employees, frankly.
Yeah. Okay. Alraj, you have a question?
Okay. Actually, sorry to extend this past the hour, guys. We have a fantastic question from Brian Liu. This is saying that can work from home policy offered by companies actually have a positive impact by getting housewives to go back to work?
I mean, Chin Han, maybe have things to say as well, but for me, I think yes, definitely a very positive impact to it for several reasons. So one, of course, that new norm that we have now gotten more used to working from home has become something of a culture in organizations that we see. So people are very familiar in using tools like video conferencing to do their work. And in fact, I think they work longer hours at home. But the other more important thing here is that organizations need to take on board that principle that we shared earlier about making work more portable. So when you make work more portable, you're able to then define clearer targets, clearer expectations of what needs to be done. So people who are actually housewives and planning to go back to the corporate world or to go back to work, they can actually start to get involved in tasks that they can then produce more specifically and more guided, rather than things that requires their physical position in the office. Yeah.
I'm going to just pick you up on this. I think I'm interested in best in case scenarios, best in class lessons that we can share with people. And I thought about this. What we are doing is we've got to take the best ideas from the gig economy, which, for example, Grab. Grab is managing millions of drivers, and how do they manage to do it? They have the feedback from the customer. They have a lot of other tools that they use, and possibly this is the direction we would have to take, either for the work from home or for the future gig economy. Do you think that kind of parallel is fair? Again, I'm sorry the time has run over, but yeah, a few last words perhaps on this or the general topic, guys, from both of you.
Okay, I'll go first, and then I'll let Chin Han take the closing one. But yes, I think the Grab model and the way of those gig economy models will be more prevalent, and I think that's highlighted as well in our slides. So I think the main thing that makes it possible is truly that trust governance, right? Which is having a performance model that is based on decentralized trust, whereby people can be self-driven. And the incentive model around that is more instant, rather than waiting till the end of the year or waiting to the end of the month. So if I like to work more and get gratification immediately, I will just put in extra effort. I wouldn't probably even take lunch, and I will drive through the hour during lunch. So this sort of work portability and the incentivization model will then set up the right governance or right performance governance model for this to happen.
Very nice.
Okay, for me, I think just to address this, and perhaps we were referring to house anybody, since it's not just housewives, it could be house husbands as well. Really, it's about tapping different groups of people. I just saw an article in The Edge today about an organization that tries to leverage off retirees and trying to get them to contribute, pairing them with the right organizations to find, who need some assistance and so forth. So at the end of the day, it's an economic thing, right? So if there's a demand, the supply needs to be found. And if organizations are smart about these things, you can start to tap on house anybody's, you can start to tap on retirees, you can start to tap on the gig economy, you can start to tap on AI to leverage whatever you want, to solve your particular problem. So this is actually, for me, a little bit of a turning point, I think. I mean, because of necessity, organizations have to be more innovative in terms of service delivery and finding out the best way to the most cost efficient, but not sacrificing customer experience and all of those things. And if it's using a housewife or using AI or using a retiree or using a millennial, whichever works the best, I think is the way to go. So organizations, back to what we said right from the start, is about flexibility. The leader plays a paramount role in terms of driving organizations and keeping people to keeping their organization to the true north. The leader also has to make sure that they communicate all the way, because as you pivot all the time and you don't tell anybody what you're doing, it just sounds like you're running around like a headless chicken. But if you're pivoting all the time and you're telling people why you do it, you are a dynamic leader, right? You're doing the same things, but without communication, it's two ends of the spectrum. So in these certain times, I think a few things, while a leader is important and everything, I think we want to make a point that there are administrative things that you need to do, and Jim has touched upon these, some of the SOPs, protocols, policies, all of those things. Combine it with strong leadership, and you've got a winning combination.
Yeah, great,
fantastic.
Okay, thank you, Chin Han, for that positive summing up of positive leadership. Communication is key, but actually also it's down to specifics now, isn't it? And in terms of moving forward on that strategy to make it long lasting. Thank you, Jim, for all your data analysis and explaining everything you've done in such concise, orderly detail. That was great. Thank you. Thank you to Sean, who is our tech guy, making sure we're all on track and all on where we should be. Thank you to Sharifa for forwarding the questions to us. Thank you to Balraj for helping to moderate this one, and thank you for the work coming up with the questions. Our next event is on Wednesday, 13th, 8 p.m. Dr. Asley is going to be talking to us from New York on the state of the education sector and how education is affected. And don't forget, you can catch all of these videos. You can forward this video. It's going to be published soon on our YouTube channel. So feel free to forward that and watch again, because there's a lot of information to pull out from there. So thank you very much again to Jim and to Chin Han. That was great. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
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 Bye.